Greetings and welcome to the lecture for Chapter 9. This lecture is where we're covering the assessment process and family assessment. It's important to note that why do we use assessment? Do we use it in individual therapy? Think to yourself for a minute and think ways that we use assessment. Assessment is a vital part of any type of individual therapy, including substance abuse counseling. And the main reason why assessment is so important in family counseling is much like it is needed in and used in substance abuse counseling. In substance abuse counseling, assessment is the way that we find a diagnosis in order to recommend a level of treatment. Same thing happens in individual therapy for those who may not have a substance abuse diagnosis, as well as what we use in family therapy. What kind of things would we want to know? Think to yourselves, what do you want to know about a chemically dependent person's family? Well, some of the things you want to know is from every point of view, you want to know what is going on in the family. If the chemically dependent, the person who is the client, if their parents are also using, if there's other family members that are using, where this person started using, what age that they started using, how has their addiction progressed over the years. Keep in mind that everyone has some idea that there is something wrong with the family. They just are not always sure what it is, or not ready to discuss the real reasons, which is alcohol or drug abuse. Keep in mind that you may have moderate users, moderate alcohol users in the family, and then you may have someone who is, struggling with hardcore alcoholism, late stage alcoholism. But if, and there's a really good episode of Addiction that where, I'm sorry, Intervention. There's a good episode of Intervention where the daughter has chemical dependency, but so does the dad. And they offer for her to go to treatment, she accepts, and they also offer for him to go to treatment, and he does not go. So you can think of that if one person in the family gets sober, then if we bring into light the addiction of other members, well, they may be avoidant to looking at the other family members' addiction because it may shed light on their own. The family may be there because of continued use of the various members. Even when agreeing that a specific problem exists, various members will likely have different perceptions of the problem and its cause. Some people may say that they have no idea that there's a problem or where the problem comes from. There may be underlying factors such as abuse or neglect as well. There may be, and usually is, more than one problem in the family. So when we look here, what we need to assess is we have to assess every angle, every possible issue. One thing also is that we have to bring up here is when adequate boundaries are lacking, whether only between two members or the entire family, and heavy enmeshment is indicated, the chances of finding incest or sexual abuse in the family is greater. Incest may be perpetuated by an older sibling as well as by an adult member. In many instances, incest is committed by a grandparent or another member of the extended family. So this is something that we can't rule out, and we have to be prepared to look into, or we have to be prepared that these type of things are going to come out as we look at that. I had a recent situation at one of the offices that I work with where after a class, a adolescent was very defensive through the entire class, and then at the end of the class, the dad handed a note to one of my staff saying that the person that is being referenced here had been raped at a party. And now that's kind of a separate addition here, but we see with alcohol and trauma a lot of times that there's issues with blackout. Someone who's an adolescent who's drinking to binge drinking or drinking in heavy amounts may experience periods of blackout, and therefore there can be issues of sexual abuse within the family or in many other contexts. Be prepared for that. That is something that we see. Also, the person's level of dependence, we need to know, some clinics have different levels. The DSM, of course, is changing, where we have a substance use disorder, and we want to verify how severe this person's substance use is, which varies a little bit from the recent most recent categories that we've had in place from the DSM-4 TR, which showed abuse and dependence as different levels of addiction. What we're going to change now with the DSM-5, and we're going to merely assess a substance use disorder and then find out the severity of that substance use. We also need to assess here the level of maladaptive behavior in the family in response to the addiction, which those rules I'm going to talk about are don't talk, don't feel, and don't change, and we're going to continue that through the rest of this lecture. How much the addiction is incorporated into the identity, the family identity, how much the addiction is being enabled, and how much the other family members' roles are in place to sustain that. Also, the enabling behaviors that are in place in order for that to happen. We need to know which stage that the family is in, and this is on page 93. The early stage of addiction, the middle stage or the late stage of dependency. The early stage is characterized by a beginning of addiction. The early stage, I believe that's what we're going to go on to. This is not the lecture that does that, but definitely read through page 93 where it talks about the early stage is the beginning of addiction. The middle stage is seen as a continued progression of addiction, a little more severity. Family roles are compromised and shifted, and the dependent reacts differently among the family members. And then the late stage of dependency, the roles are so rigid that there is conspiracy, often against the addict or dependent, seeking to exclude them from normal behaviors. And then the questions to consider here on page 95 are, have chemically dependency and its related behaviors become the central organizing principle of the family? To what extent has the family shifted to place emphasis on the short-term stability at the expense of long-term growth? What type of changes have occurred in the family functioning? And in what manner have the regulatory behaviors been altered, profoundly influenced the overall shape of the family growth and development? So you need to be able to assess and this is when we talk about for arrested development, how much has the emotional, physical, and social growth needs of the family ceased or stopped as a result of the addicted behavior. Other issues that we want to look at is emotional abuse, which can include domestic violence and sexual abuse, abandonment, neglect, communication style, physical and mental conditions. Now, keep in mind that one of my area of specializations in the field has been and is domestic violence and substance abuse. And so with domestic violence, it's important to understand that while the abuse may be more severe in a domestic violence case when alcohol or drugs is present, the domestic violence is not a result of the alcohol and drug use. It is made worse by the alcohol or drug use. Domestic violence specifically is a form of abuse and control, or control of another person through the provision or use of abuse, and that abuse can be verbal, which is emotional, sexual, which is physical, and any combination thereof. So when we look at this, we're going to know that families, you're going to have clients that come to your groups have seen incidents where victims of domestic violence turn to alcohol or drugs to deal with the abuse, and then become chemically dependent or even abusers themselves. We also see the children of domestic violence. Children that grow up in a home where there's abuse may go on to abuse alcohol and drugs and then also continue to perpetuate the cycle of violence. So these are all other issues that you want to assess in the family and find out if there's any of these other issues that are going on. Birth order has a lot to do with how a family interacts with each other. There are certain characteristics, including perceived birth order, and what that means is an only child may be the only child for 10 years of their life, and children and the parents may have a baby, and that child may still consider themselves an only child. The eldest child tends to become more adult-like than younger children, and will often take on a role in the family. The middle child usually has greater difficulty finding a place in the family because they're squeezed from both the top and the bottom. And then the youngest child has a unique position. The last child represent an issue of loss for the parents. The child is very often becomes rebellious and a risk taker because he or she is not constrained by family rules as the other siblings. And then there's conflicting data on how much these are rigid. Now, I'll say this. From my family perspective, I'm the youngest of four, and believe me, what the textbook says about this, I've seen. So I'm looking forward to seeing your genograms as you turn them in to be able to see what your family order or interactions was like. I know that the two middle children in my family were very much middle children. The oldest sibling was the one who constantly says that she's our second mother, and then me being the youngest. I wouldn't say that I was a rebel as much as I would say that I had less supervision, in my opinion, than the older children reported to have had. And I felt a little, um, you know, taken back by my parents' lack of interaction in certain school activities and stuff. Because they had already done it for three other children. So for me, I felt like there was a little bit of a loss of parental interaction, which most children or adolescent may report as a more of a gift rather than a hindrance. So to complete the picture, the information must be gathered, and we can do this in a genogram. Historical information about the family, historical information about the extended family. You must be able to listen carefully and take the good notes, understanding the ages, deaths, divorces, names, children, stories, etc. as you assess. One other way to gather this data is through the genogram, a family tree or map, depiction of in-graph form. 3 generations is used most frequently to show the interconnection and where this person has really grown from, and then also helps understand enmeshment, boundaries, and other problems. Finally, some helpful hints to help you to go through this process. And keep in mind that on page 100 and 101, 102 and 103, there are some very good graphs that show what a genogram looks like. Also, some helpful hints for a genogram is have them include dates of marriage, deaths, and births and years. Why? So you can know if there was any crisis that happened that can be correlated directly to the beginning of substance use. Sometimes it's helpful to have all the members coming to therapy to make a genogram to see if they all perceive events and incidents the same, or if there are any difference in opinions. And some use it as an assessment tool, and some use it as a way to springboard conversation in therapy. Keep in mind that when I say the word therapy, that I'm saying that psychotherapy and psychotherapy that is used for chemical dependency counselors, which we know in Texas, chemical dependency counselors is the only associate level or undergrad level where clinical work can be done. So, a lot of times we're looking at more intense therapeutic tools that are used for chemical dependency counselors. So these therapeutic tools are part of the clinical work that you'll do as you go on from just being a counselor to being what we call a clinician. A clinician is something that is developed over time with experience. The license that you get as a counselor is the beginning, the counselor intern registration, and through your practicums is the beginning that's going to help to springboard you to a place of clinical practice, which is where you'll be able to use these tools and techniques to elicit the change that is needed, which is the therapeutic process in a nutshell. So I hope you've enjoyed this lecture. The lecture following this is going to be about therapeutic tools, which is kind of what I'm discussing now, and that'll be the last chapter lecture, and then I'll also do a wrap-up lecture at the end of the here in the next few weeks to wrap up everything we've learned in the book and also to prepare you for the final exam in this course. I look forward to seeing you then. Thanks.